When the bell rang, students filed out quickly, sensing the impending confrontation. Brandon took his time, deliberately packing his things slowly while his friends waited in the hallway. Finally, when the room had emptied, he stood and walked toward the door. Maya stepped into his path. "Mr. Hayes, we need to talk about your behavior today." Brandon stopped, close enough that Maya had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "My behavior?" he asked, voice dripping with false innocence. "I was just sitting in class, Miss Sterling. Is there a problem with that?" Up close, she could smell his expensive cologne, see the calculated coldness in his expression. This wasn't a teenage boy testing boundaries. This was someone who'd learned to weaponize his privilege. "You were late, disruptive, and disrespectful. That's not acceptable in my classroom." Maya kept her voice professional, but her hands were shaking slightly. She clasped them behind her back. Brandon noticed, and his smirk widened. "Disrespectful? I think you're being a little sensitive. Maybe you're not cut out for this job if a student asking questions bothers you that much." "I'm not bothered, Mr. Hayes. I'm establishing expectations. If this behavior continues, there will be consequences." Maya hated how defensive she sounded, how young. Brandon leaned against the doorframe, completely relaxed, completely in control. "Consequences," he echoed. "You mean like what happened to Ms. Patterson last year, when she tried to fail the starting running back and had to resign?" The words hit like a physical blow. Maya had heard about Miss Patterson during interviews, a veteran teacher who'd left mid-year under mysterious circumstances. She hadn't known the details, had assumed it was personal reasons. Now, understanding dawned with sickening clarity. "That's not going to happen," Maya said, but her voice wavered. Brandon pushed off from the doorframe, brushing past her as he headed into the hallway. "We'll see," he called over his shoulder. "Welcome to Riverside, Miss Sterling. Hope you last longer than a semester." Then he was gone, leaving Maya alone in her classroom, the silence somehow louder than all the earlier noise. She sank into her desk chair, hands still trembling, and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. The rest of Maya's first day passed in a blur of faces, and names she struggled to remember. Between classes, she caught whispers and sidelong glances from students in the hallways. Word had spread about her confrontation with Brandon, and she could feel herself being evaluated, categorized, dismissed. By the time the final bell rang, exhaustion had settled into her bones like winter cold. She was packing her bag when Principal Victoria Chun appeared in her doorway. Miss Chun was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and an expression that gave nothing away. "Miss Sterling, may I speak with you for a moment?" Maya's stomach dropped, but she nodded. Gesturing to the student desk nearest her own, Miss Chung closed the door and sat down with a heavy sigh. "I heard about your interaction with Brandon Hayes this morning," Miss Chung began, and Maya's heart sank further. Multiple students mentioned it. Maya opened her mouth to explain, but the principal held up a hand. "I'm not here to reprimand you. You were absolutely right to intervene when you saw bullying. That's exactly what we want from our faculty." Relief flooded through Maya, but it was short-lived. Miss Chun's expression remained serious. "However, I need you to understand the reality of the situation. Brandon Hayes is not a typical student. His father, Senator Hayes, sits on the State Education Committee. He's also a major donor to our athletics program and has significant influence with the school board. Are you saying I should have let him harass Daniel Fisher?" Maya heard the edge in her own voice and tried to soften it. "I mean, I understand there are politics, but..." Miss Chung cut her off again, her tone gentle but firm. "I'm saying you need to be careful. Document everything. Keep detailed records of every interaction. Because if this escalates, and with Brandon, it often does, you'll need ironclad evidence to back up any disciplinary action." Maya absorbed this information, feeling naive and overwhelmed. "What happened to Miss Patterson?" she asked quietly. Miss Chun's face tightened. Miss Patterson was an excellent teacher who made the mistake of challenging Senator Hayes directly. There were accusations of bias, questions about her grading practices, complaints from other parents that materialized out of nowhere. Eventually, she resigned rather than fight a battle she couldn't win. "That's not right," Maya said, anger replacing her earlier fear. "That's not how schools should work." Miss Chun smiled sadly. "No, it's not. But it's how they often do work when money and power are involved. I'm telling you this because I see potential in you, Miss Sterling. You're smart, passionate, exactly what our students need. But you need to be strategic. Pick your battles. Protect yourself." After Miss Chun left, Maya sat in her empty classroom as afternoon light slanted through the windows. Everything she'd learned in her education program about fairness and equality felt suddenly theoretical, disconnected from this messy reality. She thought about Daniel Fisher's grateful eyes, about Brandon's mocking smirk, about Miss Patterson who'd been pushed out for doing her job. A choice was forming, whether she was ready for it or not. The next few weeks established an uncomfortable pattern. Brandon continued his campaign of small insurrections. He'd arrive late with elaborate excuses, question her interpretations of texts in ways designed to sound academic, but were actually challenges to her authority, and make comments that walked the line between acceptable and inappropriate. Maya documented everything, as Miss Chun had advised, filling a growing folder with dated notes and incident reports. But Brandon's attacks weren't limited to the classroom. She began noticing other changes. Student papers she was certain she'd graded would go missing from her bag, forcing her to ask students to resubmit work. Her classroom supplies, carefully organized each evening, would be disarranged by morning. Once, someone changed her whiteboard message from the day's assignment to a crude joke about her age. Small things, deniable things, but cumulatively exhausting. The social isolation was worse. Other teachers were friendly but distant, offering sympathetic smiles but little actual support. Maya understood. They were protecting themselves, not wanting to become collateral damage in her war with Brandon Hayes. The only colleague who seemed genuinely supportive was Marcus Webb, the history teacher whose classroom was next door. Marcus was in his 40s, had been teaching at Riverside for 15 years, and had a reputation for being unflappable. He'd stopped by Maya's classroom one afternoon after school, leaning against her doorframe with a knowing expression. "I heard you've been having some trouble with our golden boy," he said without preamble. Maya looked up from her grading, surprised by his directness. "Is it that obvious?" she asked. Marcus walked in and sat on the edge of his student desk. "Brandon Hayes is a pattern, not a person. Every few years, he finds a new teacher to target, usually someone young or new, someone he thinks he can break. 2 years ago, it was the art teacher who dared to critique his girlfriend's portfolio. Last year, Miss Patterson. Now you." Maya set down her red pen, giving Marcus her full attention. "Why does he do it?" Marcus shrugged. "Because he can. Because his whole life, people have told him he's exceptional, untouchable. Because his father has taught him that rules are for other people. Take your pick." He paused, his expression softening. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "Miss Chun said to document everything," Maya replied. "So that's what I'm doing." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Good. But documentation only helps if you're planning to use it. Are you?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Maya thought about Miss Patterson, about all the subtle and not-so-subtle messages she'd received about not rocking the boat. Then she thought about Daniel Fisher and the other students who watched her every day, learning whether adults would stand up for what was right or cave to convenience. "Yes," Maya said finally. "If he crosses a serious line, I'm going to use it." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Then you better be ready for war, because that's what it'll be. Senator Hayes doesn't lose quietly. He stood up, heading for the door, but paused at the threshold. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. This school needs teachers who actually give a damn. That conversation stayed with Maya as October turned into November. She became hypervigilant, always aware of Brandon's presence in her classroom, always prepared for his next move. Her teaching suffered, she knew. She was spending so much energy on managing one student's behavior that she had less to give to the other 25 in each class. It wasn't fair to them, but she didn't know how else to handle it. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in mid-November. Maya had assigned a creative writing project where students had to write a personal narrative about a moment of growth or change. Most submissions were thoughtful, if not particularly deep. Brandon's submission was different. It was technically well-written, grammatically perfect. But the content made Maya's blood run cold. The essay was ostensibly about learning to stand up for himself against a teacher who had unfairly targeted him. But the details were too specific, too pointed. Maya read the essay 3 times, her hand shaking with each pass. This wasn't just a test of boundaries anymore. This was a threat, a preview of Brandon's endgame. He was constructing a narrative where she was the villain and he was the wronged hero. And he'd submitted it as a classroom assignment, creating a paper trail that could be used against her later. It was masterful in its cruelty, sophisticated in its malice. She considered her options. She could fail the assignment for being inappropriate, but that would likely trigger the very complaint process Brandon was threatening. She could pass it with a low grade based on the rubric, ignoring the personal nature of the content. Or she could confront this directly, call Brandon out for what he was doing. Miss Chun's warning echoed in her mind. Be strategic. Pick your battles. But Maya had reached her limit. This wasn't about classroom management anymore. This was about a student weaponizing his privilege to intimidate and silence, learning that he could destroy anyone who challenged him. If she backed down now, she'd be teaching Brandon that his tactics worked. Worse, she'd be teaching every other student in that classroom that power and money always won. She made her decision the next day. Maya asked Brandon to stay after class. He complied with exaggerated patience, his friends waiting in the hallway just like before. When the room cleared, Maya placed his essay on the desk between them. We need to talk about this, she said, keeping her voice level. Brandon glanced at the paper and shrugged. It's fiction. That's what you assigned, right? Creative writing? It's a thinly veiled threat, Maya countered. You've depicted me in a negative light, described events that parallel our actual interactions, and essentially outlined your plan to have me fired. That's harassment, Mr. Hayes, and it's documented in your own words. She tapped the essay for emphasis. I'm referring this to the administration as a formal complaint. For the first time since she'd met him, Brandon's composure cracked. His jaw clenched and real anger flashed in his eyes. You're making a mistake, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Do you have any idea what my father will do when he hears about this? He'll destroy you. He'll make sure you never teach anywhere, not just here. Maya felt fear spike through her, but she'd gone too far to retreat now. Then I guess I'll have to make sure my documentation is thorough enough to withstand scrutiny. I have records of every late arrival, every disruption, every inappropriate comment you've made since the first day of school. I have witness statements from other students. And now I have this essay, where you've essentially confessed to conducting a harassment campaign. Brandon stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the linoleum. You're going to regret this, he said, leaning over the desk in a clear attempt at intimidation. You think you're some kind of hero standing up to the big bad privileged kid? You're just a naive little girl playing teacher. This is going to end badly for you, I promise. Maybe, Maya said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. But at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. Can you say the same? Brandon's face flushed red. For a second, she thought he might actually hit her, and she braced herself. But he just grabbed his bag and stormed toward the door, pausing only to deliver a parting shot. My dad's calling the principal today. Enjoy your career while it lasts. True to his word, Senator Hayes called that afternoon. Maya was in Miss Chun's office by 3:30, listening as the principal recounted the conversation with carefully neutral language. Senator Hayes is very concerned about what he perceives as targeted harassment of his son. He's requesting a meeting with you, me, and the school board to discuss the situation. Maya's stomach churned, but she kept her expression calm. I welcome that meeting. I have extensive documentation of Brandon's behavior in my classroom. She handed Miss Chun a thick folder she'd prepared that morning, her hands steady despite her racing heart. Everything is dated and detailed. Multiple incidents, multiple witnesses. Miss Chun flipped through the folder, her expression unreadable. When she looked up, there was something new in her eyes, respect mixed with concern. This is very thorough, Miss Sterling, but you need to understand what you're getting into. Senator Hayes doesn't fight fair. He'll hire lawyers. He'll dig into your background. He'll turn this into a public spectacle, if that's what it takes to protect his son. I understand, Maya said, but I can't let him terrorize me into silence. If I do that, what am I teaching? That bullies win if they have enough money and power. That's not a lesson I'm willing to give. Ms. Chun was quiet for a long moment, studying Maya with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Then, unexpectedly, the principal smiled. Ms. Patterson said something very similar before she left, Ms. Chun said softly. I didn't support her the way I should have. I let the board and the senator push her out because it was easier than fighting. I've regretted that every day since. She closed the folder and met Maya's eyes. I won't make that mistake again. If you're willing to stand up to this, I'll stand with you. The words hit Maya like a wave of relief so powerful her eyes actually stung with unshed tears. Thank you, she managed. Miss Chun nodded briskly, back to business. We'll need to prepare carefully. I'm going to contact our union representative and the district's legal counsel. The board meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday. That gives us 6 days to build an airtight case. Those 6 days were a blur of preparation. Maya spent every free moment reviewing her documentation, writing detailed accounts of each incident, coordinating with Miss Chun and the union representative, a sharp woman named Patricia Ruiz who'd been fighting school board battles for 20 years. Patricia reviewed everything with a critical eye, asking pointed questions and identifying weaknesses in their case. PSA is your strongest piece, Patricia said during one prep session. It's in his own handwriting, submitted as a class assignment. He can't claim it was taken out of context or misunderstood. But we need witness testimony too. Other students who can corroborate your account of his classroom behavior. That was the hardest part. Most students were too afraid of social repercussions to speak up, but Daniel Fisher wasn't. When Maya asked if he'd be willing to provide a written statement about the bullying incident from her first day, he agreed immediately. Brandon has been doing this stuff for years, Daniel said quietly. Somebody needs to stop him. If I can help, I want to. His statement was detailed and damning, describing not just that one incident, but a pattern of intimidation targeting multiple students, too. Other students came forward as well. Both juniors in Maya's second period class who'd witnessed Brandon's disruptions firsthand. Their statements, combined with Daniel's and Maya's meticulous documentation, created a comprehensive picture of calculated harassment. Patricia seemed cautiously optimistic. It's good. Really good. But you need to be prepared for them to attack you personally. Your age, your experience, possibly your race. They'll try to paint you as incompetent or biased. Maya had anticipated this. She gathered her own credentials, letters of recommendation from her student teaching supervisors, transcripts showing her academic excellence, teaching evaluations from her first months at Riverside that were almost universally positive. She wanted to walk into that board meeting with an unassailable professional record. But even as she prepared, doubt crept in during quiet moments. Was she being brave or foolish? Principled or self-destructive? The night before the board meeting, Maya couldn't sleep. She lay in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction with Brandon, second-guessing every decision. Around 2 in the morning, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She almost didn't check it, but curiosity won. The message made her blood run cold. Drop your complaint tomorrow, or everyone will know about your DUI from college. Maya's hands shook as she read it. She'd never had a DUI, had barely drunk in college, but the threat was clear. They were willing to fabricate evidence, to lie without hesitation. She took screenshots, forwarded them to Patricia and Miss Chun, and tried to calm her racing heart. This was what intimidation looked like when you fought back against power. Patricia's response came within minutes, despite the late hour. This is witness intimidation. Illegal. Save everything. We'll bring it to the board. Ms. Chun's message was shorter, but equally supportive. Don't back down. We've got your back. Maya wanted to feel reassured, but mostly she felt terrified. She was 23 years old, barely started in her career, going up against a state senator and his resources. What had she been thinking? The morning air in Riverside High tasted like chalk dust and old regrets. Maya Sterling stood in front of her bathroom mirror, 23 years old, and trying to convince herself she looked like a teacher. She'd graduated early, skipped 2 grades, earned her master's in education before most people finished their bachelor's. Now, on her first day as the youngest faculty member at one of the city's most prestigious public schools, she was drowning in doubt. Her reflection showed a petite black woman with natural hair pulled into a professional bun. Wearing a navy blazer that her mother had insisted made her look authoritative. Maya practiced her teacher voice one more time. Good morning, class. I'm Miss Sterling, your new English teacher. The words sounded hollow in the empty bathroom. She grabbed her bag and headed out, unaware that today would test everything she thought she knew about courage. The hallway of Riverside High buzzed with controlled chaos. Students clustered in groups, their laughter echoing off lockers, plastered with homecoming posters and academic achievement banners. Maya clutched her leather satchel tighter as she navigated toward room 214. She'd memorized the route during orientation, but the sea of teenagers made everything feel different. More intimidating. As she rounded the corner near the main stairwell, she heard it. A sharp voice cutting through the ambient noise. Give it back, Brandon, please. Maya stopped, her teacher instincts kicking in before her survival ones. Through the crowd, she spotted a thin boy with thick glasses cornered against a row of lockers. His backpack hung from the hands of a much larger student who dangled it just out of reach, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Brandon Hayes was a name Maya already knew. The principal had mentioned him during orientation, not as a warning exactly, but as a reality. Star quarterback, 4.0 student, senator's son. The kind of kid who existed in a protective bubble of privilege and performance. The boy he was tormenting, whose name Maya didn't yet know, looked like he was trying to disappear into the metal behind him. What's the matter, Fisher? Can't reach? Brandon lifted the backpack higher, his friends forming a loose circle that blocked the scene from casual observers. Maya's heart hammered. This was her first real test. She could walk past, pretend she hadn't seen, start her first day without making waves. Or she could do what she'd promised herself she'd always do. She straightened her shoulders and stepped forward. Excuse me, Maya said, her voice firm but not aggressive. The circle of students turned, surprise registering on their faces. Brandon's eyes swept over her, dismissive. He saw a young black woman, probably mistook her for a student. "Move along," he said casually, turning back to his victim. Maya felt heat rise in her chest but kept her voice level. "I'm Miss Sterling, the new English teacher, and I'm asking you to return that backpack immediately." The words hung in the air. Brandon's friends exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering across their features. But Brandon himself just laughed, a short bark of disbelief. He looked her up and down with exaggerated slowness, his expression shifting from amusement to something darker. "You're a teacher?" Brandon's voice dripped with mock surprise. "What are you, like 20? Did they pull you from the junior class?" His friend snickered, emboldened by his reaction. Maya felt the familiar sting of being underestimated because of her age and appearance, but she held her ground. "I'm 23. I have a master's degree, and I'm telling you for the second time to return that backpack." Brandon's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he clearly viewed as beneath his notice. "Or what?" he asked, stepping closer to Maya, using his 6-foot frame to intimidate. "You gonna write me up? Send me to the principal? My dad plays golf with the superintendent. Try it." The threat was clear, wrapped in a smile that never reached his eyes. Maya's hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to meet his gaze without flinching. "Or I document this incident, report it to the administration, and let the process work exactly as it should. Your father's golf game won't change school policy on bullying." She turned to the boy against the lockers. "What's your name?" "Daniel Fisher," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. Maya nodded, committing it to memory. She pulled out her phone and made a show of opening her notes app. "Daniel Fisher, harassed by Brandon Hayes, witnesses present." She looked back at Brandon. "The backpack, now." For a moment, she thought he might actually escalate. His face flushed red, muscles tensing. Then he threw the backpack. Not handed it back, but hurled it with force. It hit Daniel's chest with enough impact to make the smaller boy stumble. "Whatever," Brandon muttered, shouldering past Maya hard enough to make her step sideways. "Enjoy playing teacher while it lasts." His friends followed, casting backward glances that mixed curiosity with hostility. The hallway slowly returned to normal, but Maya felt eyes on her. She'd made an enemy on her first day. Daniel clutched his recovered backpack like a lifeline. "Thank you, Miss Sterling," he said quietly, adjusting his glasses with shaking hands. Maya managed a smile she didn't entirely feel. "Are you okay?" Daniel nodded, though his pale face suggested otherwise. "He does that stuff all the time. Nobody usually stops him." The words carried a weight of resignation that made Maya's chest ache. "Well, someone's stopping him now," Maya said, though she wondered if she'd just painted a target on both their backs. The warning bell rang, and students began filing toward their classrooms. Maya touched Daniel's shoulder gently. "If anything like this happens again, you come find me. Room 214. Understand?" Daniel nodded again, something like hope flickering in his eyes before he disappeared into the crowd. Maya made it to her classroom with 3 minutes to spare. She set down her bag, wrote her name on the whiteboard in careful letters, and tried to slow her racing heart. Through the doorway, students began trickling in, eyeing her with the universal suspicion teenagers reserve for new teachers. She recognized a few faces from the hallway, including 2 of Brandon's friends who took seats in the back row, whispering to each other. The period started smoothly enough. Maya distributed syllabi, explained her expectations, tried to project confidence she didn't fully possess. Most students seemed engaged, or at least politely attentive. But halfway through her introduction to the semester's first novel, the door opened. Brandon Hayes walked in, 20 minutes late. carrying a coffee cup from the expensive cafe downtown. He didn't apologize or explain, just strolled to an empty desk in the middle row and sat down. "Mr. Hayes," Maya said, keeping her voice neutral. "You're late. I'll need you to get a pass from the office." Brandon took a long, deliberate sip of his coffee, maintaining eye contact with her the entire time. "My last class ran over. I was talking to Coach Martinez about the game Friday. Important stuff." The casual dismissal of her authority made several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. Maya felt the room watching, waiting to see how she'd respond. This was another test, she realized. If she let this slide, she'd lose credibility on day one. "I understand. However, school policy requires a pass for any tardy arrival. You can get one after class or during lunch." She turned back to the board, hoping he'd let it drop. He didn't. "That's ridiculous," Brandon said, his voice louder now. "I just told you why I was late. Are you saying Coach Martinez doesn't matter? That football doesn't matter?" He was baiting her, trying to turn this into an argument about priorities, about whose time was more valuable. Maya recognized the trap, but had to navigate it carefully. The entire class held its breath. "I'm saying that every student in this room deserves a teacher who starts class on time, and every student deserves to arrive prepared and punctual. Those are the rules. They apply to everyone." Maya's voice remained steady, but inside, her confidence was cracking. Brandon leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk playing at his lips. He was enjoying this, she realized. Enjoying the power struggle in front of an audience. "Rules," Brandon repeated, drawing out the word mockingly. "You know what I think? I think you're on some kind of power trip because you're new and you want to prove something. But here's the thing, Miss Sterling." He said her name like it was a joke. "You don't know how things work here yet. Maybe you should learn before you start trying to change everything." The challenge was explicit now, and Maya felt anger rising beneath her professional facade. But she'd been trained for this, had role-played difficult students in her education courses. She took a breath, walked calmly to her desk, and picked up her attendance sheet. "I'll mark you tardy, Mr. Hayes. Please see me after class about the pass." Then she turned back to the rest of the students and continued her lesson as if nothing had happened. For the rest of the period, Brandon made small disruptions, tapping his pen loudly, sighing dramatically, whispering comments to nearby students that made them laugh. Each action was minor, plausibly deniable, but cumulatively designed to undermine her authority. Maya pushed through, calling on other students, trying to generate discussion about the themes in their first reading assignment. Some students engaged genuinely, but the atmosphere remained tense, charged with unspoken conflict.